Hey everyone, how are you? Good to see everyone. There's some new faces here, folks I don't know. Thanks so much for coming in. I appreciate it. This is our inaugural event for Ask the Entrepreneur. It is going to be starting next semester, something that we have on a monthly basis. So let your friends who are entrepreneurs or folks know about that. And it's something we're excited to have in a public space like this where people can see that there's a lot of things going on, and entrepreneurship should be a very visible thing, which is the reason why I chose to make it in a space like this and not in kind of another classroom or far away from people. So throughout the rest of the event, I want you to feel excited and interactive throughout the whole time. So if a question comes to you and you just have to ask it, or something that is particularly relevant to what someone says, feel free to just pop your hand up and say, do you mind? Because I want it to be quite interactive. It is a panel discussion in the sense that they're going to give you some information, but I want you to feel like you can kind of dig into it and ask the questions that you want. All right? Don't feel like it's just kind of a sit back and like, let me just take this in kind of situation. Really get in there and ask the folks about these things. I'm excited to have Dasheeda Dawson, Tamecca Seril, and Jimy Vasquez here today. They're actually entrepreneurs in their own right. They've created their own businesses, all in various different industries, all for various different purposes. So you're going to hear about those today. Some of you guys know my background, a little bit about my story. My background and story was I was an entrepreneur, but in the sustainability space, or the ecological space. I created a company and sold it a few years ago. I'm excited to be here and teaching again. Teaching for me now feels like an entrepreneurial venture in the sense, if anyone's in any of my classes, you know I like to transform and evolve and move things around throughout the class. It's how we should think about learning from now on in the world. So these folks are here to tell you their stories. And we'll just start down the line here. They'll start by introducing themselves and giving a quick little presentation of how in the world they got to this strange place called entrepreneurship. And then we'll move down the line. Tamecca, you want to start?
Sure. So I'm Tamecca Seril. I'm the CEO and founder of Element 9. And Element 9 is an innovation consultancy. And the way I got into entrepreneurship really was out of a set of circumstances. I was a single mom at the time, a new transplant here to New York City, and I was working at an interactive agency. So an interactive agency is essentially an ad agency that really does services and products in the digital space. So like website creation, e-commerce, apps, and things of that nature. And at the time, it was just before 9/11 in 2001. And so I gave them my 2 weeks notice. And the bridge for me actually was participating in a nonprofit program that was designed to really create this talent pipeline, because New York City at the time had a lot of what's called H-1B visas. And so at that time, I was in this program. I felt really good about myself. I was really feeling myself like, oh, I'm the star of this program, because the role I had at the time was really as a project manager and producer at this interactive agency. And so I wanted some more technical competency, so that's why I enrolled in this program. But the long and short of it was really that as a woman, and as a woman with a young child, I constantly felt pressured that I couldn't have both. And so for me, the solution was like, let me start my own business. If I'm bringing in the majority of the business into this business, they've got cash flow issues. I know how to run it top to bottom, from project management, the technical side. Why not just start my own firm? And so that's exactly what I did. So in 2001, didn't anticipate that 9/11 would happen, but nonetheless, I persevered. And my first client was actually the nonprofit that I went through that program with. And so what I went back to them with is I pitched. I said, hey, I have this idea. Why don't we help people that have displaced 9/11 workers find employers? And so what we created together was this thing called the Skills Exchange. And so from that, I literally made that one contract, replaced all of my salary for 1 year in that one contract by building this software solution, this online website for connecting displaced workers with employers. And then the second iteration of some of the work we did was, again, technology training, helping people get skills upgrades. So my role was to identify people that were good technical trainers, and then they would identify the cohort. And so the first cohort we did together was helping women that met approximately 3 criteria. They had to be women, they had to be mothers, they had to have formerly been involved in a domestic violence situation, and possibly substance abuse. And we had no shortage of filling that cohort. And so today, my business has evolved. Not only are we doing, again, service-based stuff for both startups and what I call tune-ups. Tune-ups meaning mature entities that may be a little latent and need some kind of innovation to change up their business model. But we're also now doing more in the investing space. So when we identify startups and things like that, we oftentimes like to take an additional position, whether it's just advisory or taking equity stake in it. And then 3 years ago, I also started a nonprofit venture that is essentially an impact investment fund and a boot camp for teaching entrepreneurship, specifically evidence-based entrepreneurship. And 3 years ago, we hosted our first cohort directly across the street at 240 Greenwich. So BNY Mellon was one of the partners for it, and we were able to help 20 young people, this was high school students, learn what I believe are the important fundamentals to entrepreneurship, and that's make, monetize, and matter. That the make portion is, I think everybody kind of has a skill or something that they know that they might be a subject matter expert on. And then the monetize portion is really understanding business models, like what is going to be the revenue model for your business, and then matter, which is simply human-centered design. That at the end of the day, we can all think we have great novel ideas, but those ideas are designed to, essentially fix the problems for other people.
That's great. Wow, we got a lot to talk about. I'm excited now. Go ahead.
That's a question.
Sure.
So I'm a small business owner in the e-commerce industry. I've had success in product development and organizational management, but I know that I lack a deeper understanding of web development, and I need that to build a better experience for my customers. So my question is, where do I begin to learn the fundamentals of web development? This might be a question for all of you, because a lot of you started off making a website.
Do you have your own website?
I do.
Yes. How do you build that?
I use multi-channel like e-commerce
Wix,
channels and
Squarespace,
Shopify.
I do Shopify before. Right now I use Pattern by Etsy. It's the lowest fees, but I want to build my own website from scratch.
Well, I'm one that always want to get into a system and play in it first, so it depends. I think that's why he was asking what platform. So, the most common one is probably WordPress, but there are others like Wix and Square and such that if you get into either LinkedIn or even, I call it YouTube, Google University, you'll be able to learn from a video while doing specific tasks. But I'm also just one of the people where I want to find the right strategic partner. Someone who I work well with, but it also can learn from at the same time. Because oftentimes you need it done at an expertise level that doesn't have time for you to wait to learn to get there. But you can kind of marry the two by having a strong partner who has something that you don't necessarily have as an expertise as theirs. So that would probably be my first statement.
Absolutely, I do agree with that. Partner would be good. But what I do when I build websites, and let's say my personal website, I call up Wix or Shopify, and they run through step by step what you gotta do. I think that's very helpful for like a starter. If you don't need back-end developing or like top coding, I would recommend just go into the front end development, do it yourself, or get someone to do it for you. You learn as you go. You're young, and you're gonna learn. In a year, you're gonna be much better than you were today. That's my advice.
I definitely agree with what's already been said. I think my only additional advice is that anyone that is considering a website, you gotta really know what the purpose of it is for, right? Like, I think purpose matters. Like, am I selling a product? Am I selling a service? Am I doing this to identify and get marketing? Like, for instance, is it like a landing page because I want to collect email addresses for a launch or something like that? And I think that once you figure out what the purpose is, that will then help you figure out more of like what's next. I also think that it's important for folks to learn a lot of stuff around UX, so the user experience, because when you learn user experience, your website will do a lot of the work for you, right? So whether that's, filling up a fitness class or, again, selling out an event, you may not necessarily need a great website. Rather, you just really need the tools and resources. It could be a particular presence, and the right tools you need might be on Eventbrite. But it really just depends very specifically on your industry and your purpose. What set of tools and platforms are right for you.
Thanks, guys, for giving the questions. Let's, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question. Do you guys use social media for advertising? Any of your companies, and how so? And how have they been successful with that? And how have you been able to advertise them in social media? What social media platforms have you used?
So I'll roll that into an introduction at the same time.
Okay.
So Dasheeda, if you don't mind,
Sure.
give us your introduction and then get to that question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Why not? It's like one of my favorites, no problem. So yeah, I'm Dasheeda Dawson, and I'm the weed head. I'm a self-proclaimed corporate to cannabis crossover, a global advocate, and a business strategist. I like to jokingly say I went from Target to THC, but a lot of people may know that we are legalizing cannabis globally. And I've transitioned into the industry probably about 3 years ago. More so not out of a need necessarily for the industry, but I had catastrophic reasons. My mom passed away unexpectedly, and I sort of left the traditional corporate ladder in order to pursue this. I transplanted from New York. I'm Brooklyn born, Jersey educated. I transplanted from New York into a legal market, and as soon as I stepped into the experience, being a consumer marketing expert, it was hard for me to remove myself from that. And I saw right away significant problems within the industry. And I kind of went back to what Tamecca said, which was problem solution, and immediately started to look for solutions. So I launched MJM Strategy. We are a digital focused strategic management consulting firm. I jokingly also say we're the McKinsey of marijuana. Because it really doesn't matter what problem the business has. I've started off with very small brands, much larger ones, and more recently we just focus now on municipalities. Actually, New York State is definitely one of our clients, where we're coming in and really rebranding cannabis, re-educating people around the medicinal benefits of marijuana. My degree from Princeton University is in molecular biology, so I do lean on it very heavily. I'm a STEM girl, but I received my MBA from Rutgers, and so most of my training is very traditional brand management, general management by way of Target and Victoria's Secret. So in many ways, I feel like I've branded and rebranded quite a bit for America, and so this feels like the biggest challenge because I'm really leveraging my understanding of the science background and the need for re-education with the need for advocacy. I'm from Brooklyn, and people are still getting arrested in New York State for this, and the need for wealth generation and teaching municipalities how we actually do this profitably, because other states haven't necessarily done it. I work primarily in the digital space because, to your point, Google still, this is a Schedule I drug, so Google will not let you do your typical digital marketing advertising in a funnel sense. So the social media space is some place that we have to utilize quite heavily, not without its challenges, however. For example, about 3 months ago, Facebook put a shadow ban over any words in titles or names of pages or groups that have cannabis or marijuana. So the hack around that, if you will, is using acronyms in order for people to make sure that they can still find you. But it has been constantly, figuring out what hurdle we have to jump. But we do still get to advertise, and I think you have to look at the fine print. The fine print says that you can advertise if you're talking about advocacy or education. And so we don't, for clients, we don't push leading with your product. Even if your product is not cannabis, it might be an accessory, a bag, or a tool. But if you lead with that, you're going to get blocked, and you're going to get shut down pretty quickly. If you lead with education or re-education around the science, around what's happening with the law, you have a little bit more leeway to move forward. So we're utilizing Facebook and Instagram and Twitter in terms of social media advertising, and in some cases, this is the only way that a brand in Colorado will be known in New York, right? Because it can't move across the state lines. Even more important, the digital space. So I don't know. I'll leave it there. We have a lot to talk about as far as social media is concerned. Innovation as well.
Yes, absolutely. I'd love for you both now to kind of dive in with your own view of social media in respect to how you used it initially when you were first starting out with your ideas or other businesses that you've worked in.
I think social media is very helpful. I like to see social media, as you said, like you could be in Colorado and have an e-commerce store and sell it to someone in London just because you targeted them through social media. With social media, also depends on who you want to target. Because if you want to target, let's say, like a 40 to 50-year-old woman, you can use Facebook. Or if you want to target college students, you can use Instagram. Different social media do different things with different audiences. So, yeah, social media is very big in today's business. And I like to joke around with one of my professors with the old marketing strategies versus the new marketing strategies, which is basically, they're both initially both the same because you're trying to target your consumer. But now, in today's day, you target your consumers through social media. You don't need to put up a big billboard on Times Square to target your consumers.
That's good.
I think though, I want to actually piggyback on something that Dasheeda said, and that's funnel marketing. So like if you put like one keyword or buzzword into your head today, and if you are inclined to do so, like self-teach yourself as much as you can around digital and funnel marketing specifically. It's essentially like the life cycle of tracking your customer from the initial point of contact and constantly re-engaging them, right? And I think that that's something that's often overlooked. It's where in academia we do a really bad job of doing that. Marketing of the past it's just that, it's the past. I think that if you are not necessarily as analytical, this is a good way to kind of increase and boost your analytical skills around knowing who your customer is. And even more so when you get into an industry like cannabis, like knowing who your customer is really important. You may even hear things like know your customer also in things like finance. And the reason for that is because of the fact that when you're doing these credit card transactions, there are lots of regulatory things that go into it. But on the soft side of it all, I would say step number one, go out and claim your social media handles, right? Like that was one of the jobs that Element 9 has been hired to do oftentimes for our clients. We don't use social media a lot for our practice because the majority of our clients tend to be municipal clients, so it could be like the Department of Defense, the City of New York, etc. So they're not finding us usually through social media channels, they're usually finding us through a process called an RFP. And then we go out and manage it for them. We assemble this like big team that sits around and are the subject matter experts in particular domains, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, etc. The other thing is there are a lot of great careers in this because of the fact that it's essentially managing what's called media buys. And I think that that's an important thing as founders, as new startups, that you guys should also be thinking about, like, how can I take $50 and turn that $50 into $5,000 worth of sales, right? It's really important that you start tinkering and playing around with Facebook, Instagram, and understanding what it means to run a sponsored ad campaign. So I know that some of you have like an assignment around video. Video has great traction. It tends to be one of those things in social media where you see the engagement is longer. That's the other thing, like you really want to have a lengthier engagement with your customer versus them landing on your website or wherever they find you and then disengaging within 5 seconds. You want something that tends to be viral. You want to have an offer. And most important, you want to have something that's trackable. And that's what social media gives you. Nothing else. It gives you a lower cost to get into the market for advertising, and it's trackable. I also say get familiar with social media platforms for management, so stuff like Hootsuite, Spot Social. This is where you can aggregate all of your accounts, and that way you can see like, oh, you know what, we're really outperforming more on Instagram versus in Twitter. So those are the things, like if you could invest any, like significant and substantial time into your business, I would say learn that more than things like web design and specific platforms, because the social media is something that it changes constantly, and it's, I think, a lot more autodidactic, meaning you can self-teach yourself, than all of the other pieces of it. Like finance and website development, oftentimes you're just going to need to outsource that, and there's no point in like learning that, rather leave it to the experts. But you do kind of want to be an expert on knowing the voice, the persona, all of those things of your customer.
I would just quickly piggyback that say, I liken social media to Airbnb. You're renting the space, and I say this because in my world, you can easily come back and your account be shut down. So if you're doing anything in relatively illicit cannabis, have a double account. But you're renting the space, but that's also why it's so quickly able to be decorated, right? It's like they make it so that it's easy for you to quickly get in and fit in. Yes, and so you want to capitalize on that, but your website is still your home, right? That's the place where you really are building and making your renovations, and you do want to eventually have a path from that rented space to the website. And so making sure that everything goes back to a URL, especially in Facebook, because Facebook drives the clicks. Instagram drives awareness. I do agree that each one of these platforms has a different goal based on what your specific marketing purpose is. But I do treat them like individual channels in my matrix as I'm planning. Similarly, from the ROI,
Media planning, yes, very much so.
you're kind of saying, hey, I'm wanting to spend X and expecting to get Y in return. And to be truthful, from a startup perspective, I'm spending a lot more in social media initially, right? Because it's so much easier to get in and fit in and to target various demographics than I am in my own website. In many ways, I'm even learning what my demographic is. Oftentimes I can test there very, very cheaply, as opposed to if you're doing straight Google to your website, sometimes there's a hit and a miss. So there's some financial reasons to want to learn social media as well, just in terms of the expense of the media. The expense of the click is definitely a little less expensive than Google, than what I've typically had. But I think that I agree, you want to spend some energy there because I think you make the quickest impact to your business. And then as you start to get to be a little bit more mature and you're doing the tune-ups, I feel the tune-ups happen more on your website where your home is, right? And so,
and that's where also search engine marketing and search engine optimization are more important, is on your website. And Dasheeda said another important takeaway, which is test, right? Like before you invest like thousands and thousands of dollars into your product, your service, your business, you need to test the market. And the best way oftentimes is to go and do something on social media to see what kind of traction you're going to get, to see how responsive people are to it. That's a phenomenal way to test out ideas.
And I want to jump over to Jimy just to give him a chance to give some things. If you guys want, there's plenty of seats over here. Please come grab those seats. That way you won't be, your feet won't be hurting after a few minutes. Jimy, I know you've had prior experience, prior working in a business, and successfully exiting that business, and now I want you to talk about your journey. What was your journey? What did it feel like starting there? And give us your intro.
Perfect. So my name is Jimy Vasquez. I'm currently a college student at Fordham University, majoring in a degree in entrepreneurship. I'm the CEO of Dormbox, dormitorybox.com. I just launched about a month ago. You guys can check it out. And I'm also advising for Original Gemsters as the CEO right here, the Original Gemsters. And how I became an entrepreneur or a businessman, whatever you call it, I want to say it was very young, at a very young age. I grew up with a single mom, and she didn't have much money to give me and my sister, so she would always give us $1 a day each to buy an empanada after school. And I would save it. I would literally save it just to buy like video games, which I never did, because when I got the money, I would be like, no, I'm not gonna spend my money on a $30 game. And it slowly built on that, and I eventually, like through school, whatever, I started buying little gums for school, Winter Fresh, and I would sell them for 25 cents a piece. And instead of getting $1 a day, I'll get $2 or $3 a day. And eventually I build, and when I was like 19 years old, a freshman in college, I had saved up this money, and I had just gotten my license, and I was Googling what can I do with my license. And I see this opportunity with Bimbo Bakeries. I don't know if you guys know Bimbo Bakeries. It's a cake company that sells to stores. And he said, oh, you can buy this company for this amount of money. And I was like, let's do it. Let's do it. I jumped into it. I started off with 15 stores. Eventually, as the business grew, I had over 55 stores, and I had to divide it into 2 trucks. And about a year ago, I exited the company because I'm in school. My mom wanted me to finish my degree, and it's kind of a lot of work going to a truck company. It's not easy being an entrepreneur. And since that, I sold the company about a year ago, and this summer, I was working with one of my classmates, 2 of my classmates. One happened to be a finance degree, the other one happened to be a computer science degree. And we used to trade crypto coins. And we were involved in that, and eventually we came up with this idea. Let's start off with a subscription company. We see this opportunity in this market, and we want to get into it. So what we realized was that we knew nothing about a subscription company. I've never had an e-commerce store. It was just brand new. And we got into it. We started testing out with like landing pages, little posts on Instagram, like $5 ads on Facebook. And we got some traction, so we decided we were going to continue this. And what was that? And we just started, and we're continuing to build our business. We're in the developing stage. I'm a full-time student. I work, and I'm the CEO of Dormbox.
Nice.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah. We'll follow up with a lot of questions. Anyone have any questions specifically for Jimy right now? Feel free to take questions anytime. This is not one of those wait till the end for the Q&A. Yeah, go ahead.
You know, when you started Dormbox, like, what was, like, you already had the expectation before, like, oh, I know how to do this because of Binbox. You think, like, the first time you done it helped you out more?
Repeat that question?
Like, when you first start off your business, what's the first business you start? The truck company. Do you think it was much easier starting it off with that one also?
I don't think it's easy in any form.
Like, because you've done it a second time. Like,
I mean,
the
I
second
can see
time,
what you're
like, it's gonna be like a repeat for you now.
It's not, because it's a completely different business. It's a lot of work. Having a business, starting a business is a lot of work, because I started off with this truck company. It was already established. I already had stores. I just bought the company. I see this opportunity, I buy it. But Dormbox is completely different. I have no consumers. My idea could be not validated, you know, it could not work, you know? So I feel like starting a company is much, much harder than buying a company.
It's a good idea because you're buying most of your items at wholesale on bulk, and then you're selling it to colleges or markets. It's a good idea, yeah.
When it comes to the way that we talk about marketing in startups, one of the questions I always hear from people everywhere is, I have a very limited budget. And you guys talked a little bit about that. You talked about ways that you drive things. What are some other ways that you might create content or build things that help people to find out about who you are or make things like that? Do you ever create content yourself to drive those?
Absolutely. Part of what has given me so much more opportunity in the cannabis space was realizing about 6 months in that I needed to tell a story around my transition into the industry. There weren't enough people of color in the industry, certainly not ones that had the corporate background and the education that I had. And I thought it was clever to buy the weedhead.com as a digital play, and to be truthful, that was a $7.99 purchase that within 3 months someone was trying to buy it from me for $1,100. So now 3 years later, it's the third position when you search weedhead out of all of the options, and I feel like that was unintended. Like, I thought I was just gonna get a nice, cool, digital real estate. But to become the weedhead was intentional. At some point, 6 months in, I felt like I wasn't going to advertise everything. This was something that I felt could get organic growth legitimately, and I actually felt like it was helping the industry. If I was going to rebrand something, I was going to start with myself. I'm a medical marijuana patient. I have my own various ailments, and I'm probably the most productive individual that most people know. And so if I tell my story as the weedhead, a different type, create content around that, show people the conferences that we put together, the work that I was doing, my speaking engagements, all of the things that encompasses Dasheeda Dawson, I would be representing a weedhead of a different type. And that has sort of fueled people following my story, but also wanting to work with me and wanting to work with my company. And so in many ways, inadvertently giving me that extra boost in the SEO world. I've also taken advantage of a lot of organic things that have happened. One of our biggest posts on MJM Strategy was that Michigan just passed legalization on Tuesday. And so to post something that is compelling content while everybody else is talking about it is when we get nirvana in the digital space, right? And so we look for those moments. It's easier when you have a sexier play like cannabis, but I wasn't always sexy. I mean, maybe with Victoria's Secret a little bit, but Target wasn't. Target style started off from nothing. I helped start that social media, and the strategy of using influencers was a big thing that we started there. So find out who your regional influencers are. I happen to be one in cannabis, but there's regional influencers for everything. I mean, you're one for entrepreneurship, period, right? So once you start pairing with people who already have a following and you make content together and it's compelling and it's diverse, it starts to drive the engagement and hopefully the clicks that you want to see. So I lean in heavily into that strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, one of the things that I did several years ago is I did a road trip around the country, 48 states, 145 cities. The goal being to talk to people about what is sustainability. I was in the sustainability space, and I was like, I wanted to go on a road trip. I had the flexibility to live anywhere I wanted to, so why not go on a road trip for 8 months? So being on the road for 8 months and creating content and interviewing people and talking to people, and back then you could make radio shows by just using the internet, and there was video, YouTube had just started, so there were a lot of ways that you could actually create content that drove my interest in what I was doing, which was around sustainability and the company that I eventually sold. So it really has to connect to something that you're interested in doing, or even just writing on a regular basis around something will do it. What are some other strategies that you guys might have seen in that space?
I mean, I think we've touched on it for the most part. I mean, user-generated content is important, and I think it's important primarily because it's authentic, right? I think that your customers, your consumers, people that might think you're a subject matter expert are looking for authenticity, and that's really what sells. I think that what's important now is, before it used to be a lot of stuff around credentials. Like, I went to Harvard, I did this, right, or I sold this company. Yeah, all of that is nice and quantifiable, but I think user-generated content is nice in the sense that oftentimes people look at you and they see themselves, right? And that's why the average person can easily, have a, followership of 10,000 subscribers and viewers. And I think another important resource to think about here in New York City is that YouTube is here in New York. And if you have 5,000 subscribers on your YouTube page, you can essentially use their full-fledged commercial studio, literally every kind of imaginable thing that you would think a media company has, they have it over there. So people that have quasi-professional shows are oftentimes leveraging the studio resources, and it's free there. So you can produce a broadcast quality show. I'd say the same thing goes now for audio. So get into the podcast space. Think about cultivating that with your collaborators and things like that. I do think it's important to have a producer's mentality. So thinking about who are prospective people that you might want to feature, things that might be trending, whether it's very topical, like if it's in makeup, maybe the thing now is highlighters and filters. Make sure that you're on, when you're thinking about it, also forecasting what other people might be posting, because then it becomes this nice kind of wave of traction that you can leverage as well.
Forecasting, you can use big events. So for example, when I was at Victoria's Secret, we always use Oscars and Emmys. We know people are going to be posting, or premiere time for your various shows, Empire, etc. You actually can predict their social media daily, I call it, where you got your Man Crush Mondays, your Woman Crush Wednesday. If you participate even in that in a consistent basis, then you're actually part of the community. It will reward you in the algorithm when you then try to bid and spend money in the community. Facebook is very finicky. I like to talk about them a lot because they're very much like a neighborhood watch. It's like, if you just moved in, can you go next door trying to sell Girl Scout cookies to your neighbor? No, they don't know who you are yet. You haven't posted, you haven't participated, you haven't played in it, so you'll wind up spending a lot more. So that's another mistake I constantly see, where you jump right in, you create your page, you have you got your 200 closest friends who have liked it, and then you start bidding right away without actually engaging. So you want to do that. And then I think the last thing that I'll say is, don't sleep on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a very, very important social tool. It's not Facebook to remind people about that in terms of what's appropriate to post. I'm a little bit of a stickler on what's okay for LinkedIn, but it is important for you to recognize that area where you put your summary, that's searchable text. And so when people put in whatever, for me it's cannabis and strategy, I want to be in the top, right? And so that's searchable text. Make sure what you're saying about yourself really pertains and hits on those keywords that people are going to put in to find you. Whether it's a recruiter, if you're looking for a job, and I say that as well, or if you're an entrepreneur, and especially if you're in the consulting world, and you satisfy a specific niche. You want to make sure you're not sleeping on LinkedIn, and creating a LinkedIn page for your company, and actually connecting to it appropriately, and anybody else working for your company. All of that creates strong SEO and presence, because LinkedIn has a lot of value from how many people visit it on a daily basis. You'll often find if you do that, once you go and Google your company, you'll see that that's one of your first or second right away. So just some tips, don't sleep on LinkedIn and stuff.
Yeah, I also just want to say, think about your content also from an editorial calendar standpoint. If you want to see yourself in, say, an Essence magazine or a GQ magazine, you also need to get familiar with who those writers are, because part of this is also knowing your story very well and constantly pitching and reinventing that story. So like if you develop content and it was a blog or a white paper or some video, you want to find a way to get that content to live on someone else's website, their newsletter, etc. Like it's all about almost essentially syndicating that content across multiple channels. And another good resource to kind of start subscribing to is HARO, so Help a Reporter Out. So every single day, twice a day, reporters go out and basically are looking for quote experts or people, everyday people. They'll say, for instance, this is a really wacky story, somewhat unrelated to business, but one time I saw this scenario on Help a Reporter Out, and it was for adoption stories. And that's how I got featured on a National Geographic special doing a whole genealogy study and affirming like, oh, this was true, like you actually are XYZ based on your DNA results, and got to be filmed and all that. That helps again when you're a CEO, even if you're not necessarily pitching your product, but to be featured on a nationally broadcasting show where they're like, oh, this is Tamecca CEO, you'd be surprised like what happens because of that. So it may not always be exactly aligned to your business, but those would be, I think, again, some additional top things to consider. Think about an editorial calendar, like what's important is Fashion Week in February important, is Fashion Week in September important, what trade shows are there, because you want to be lockstep with that stuff and know it so that you have content, people start to see you, and that you're visible in those circles. Because they're always looking for new, fresh faces, and especially now, people of color, more than anything.
Is there a specific platform like Hootsuite that your company uses?
Yes, so we use things like Hootsuite, Sprout Social, and others. It depends really on the client and whether or not that is something that they're already using in-house. So we adapt to the platform based on the client.
Like
But
sorry.
for general consumers, like you can do Hootsuite, you can, I think, manage up to 3 channels on Hootsuite for free without having to do a paid subscription. Yeah.
And then I guess Sprout Social has Simply Measured. I used to love them. Connected with it, and they have something where if you have your Instagram that's a business one and it's appropriately connected to your Facebook, it won't count as two different ones. So there's some pros and cons for both. We also started using this year a platform called Hey Orca. I really like them, even though I tend to be one of those beta testers for almost everything. So if you have something you want to test, send me. But for apps, I love them. But no, Hey Orca was pretty cool because it really does show you it in the environment, which I find can be a little challenging. I like to see what is actually going to be posted and how the hashtags look, because they can be a little bit harassive after a certain amount. So it was more visual.
And there's a tech resource called Capterra, so CAPTERRA. And what Capterra does is essentially, they mine the technologies and then do comparisons. So like this way you can kind of compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and they'll tell you like these are all of the features located in it. So that sometimes can help as a quick way to identify software and then go out and start to figure out which software is right for you, depending on what features you're looking for.
Students here and other people who are in the room who've come to the event have various different interests. Some are entrepreneurs, some are interested in marketing careers, have various interests in marketing. What would you say is the easiest way for people to start to move down the path of a marketing career or getting involved in marketing? And at the same time, how much experience is needed now in this social media space before someone can become, quote, a consultant or someone to advise like small businesses, like the corner store and things like that?
Well, I think young, and everybody seems pretty young here, people have a lot of experience with social media. We've been using it since probably high school. So you don't need to learn much to be an expert in social media. If you want to get into the marketing space, I would advise maybe becoming a brand ambassador for a company or watching YouTube, which is like Google University said, and just get familiar with platforms, different platforms, and yeah.
I'm a proponent of utilizing the skills that you do have, and yes, going out to the neighborhood and seeing who can leverage it, right? So definitely think that's important. But I also know that I've struggled as an agency with, somebody's cousin who does the social media when I'm doing like, Excel spreadsheet analytics, trying to drive the highest ROI based on what we're investing. So there's slightly different levels. And what you can do is definitely get internships at, companies like ours probably, to be able to start to get exposure to some of the higher order things that happen in social beyond the post. I am one of the people where I feel like I can teach anybody anything, and in fact, I feel like it's often symbiotic. So you do come with sort of the native power, native understanding and intelligence about what's happening with the new marketing, which tends to be mostly around social. And what I tend to think that internships tend to bring are some of the traditional key KPIs or key performance indicators that become important for people like myself or the CEO or for my clients, right? I need to show that we were able to make money, period. It's not just that we had this many likes, right? So there's that gap, and so I would suggest that. But I also think how you market yourself is a starting point, what your resume looks like, what your own digital presence looks like. I'm not saying I judge it fully, but I do judge it. Because I think, again, when you are native, you know that this is where people are going. People are Googling more and more as they start to look for candidates or find people in the space. And so how you present yourself, maybe as a brand ambassador, often showcases just your general understanding of even just marketing yourself and your personal brand.
Good. Question for you in general. A couple of you have talked about your past and the way that you've come into your profession and your career that you have now. There was a point, I think, as all of us have experienced in different places, where you had to choose to overcome some type of intense fear of making a dramatic change. How did you move through that, complete that step to start out and begin?
I haven't moved through it yet. I'm gonna be 100. I'm like 3 years in, and I've been entrepreneurial all my life, always had a side hustle all my life, but the safety net of corporate, always there for the most part, maybe except for a year time where I took that leap, and then I was like, oh, no, I'm not ready. Every day I wake up and it's exhilarating. I get an adrenaline rush because I get to decide what I want to do, what are the priorities, what's important, but at the same time, it's sort of that Jason Bourne jump out of a plane and adrenaline rush too, because there isn't a safety net. What decisions I make impacts the 10, 12 other people that work for me, impacts myself, and that can be very scary every day. So I won't lie and act like I'm not afraid and I don't have those moments. It can be very, very trying still to be an entrepreneur and new at it. When I hear 01, like immediately I'm like, oh my God, how do I know? We'll be talking afterwards. Because you need mentors, right? You need people to help you get through it and understand how they've gone through it. So oftentimes I remix other people's plans and I look at what people have done that are really great and figure out how that makes me feel secure and how that makes it apply, to what fears I maybe have. So definitely find your mentor, find the people who inspire you, because the fear doesn't really go away. At least it hasn't yet for me 3 years in.
I think as young people, and especially as students, this is your safety net, right? Because right here at any academic institution, there typically is an accelerator, an incubator, there's professors. They can open up so many doors for you. And if you want to test an idea, this is the place to test it. I think the best places to really launch businesses is when you're still a student, quite honestly. So, when I was in grad school, one of the classes that was really popular, whether you were at Harvard or at MIT, was this class called New Enterprises. And so many of the products that you see today, or things that you've heard about, whether it's the Lark sleep system or HubSpot, you name it, all came out of this class, right? And these were all just ideas that people had. And the reason it's so important to also launch now versus later is like you won't have as much debt, you're probably living at home, you have support that you really haven't quantified, quite honestly. And I think, again, going to Dasheeda's point about being native, these are things that I think that as Black and brown people, we oftentimes just, we undervalue ourselves. Like we forget that we are the experts on certain things in our community. So I think about Uber. To me, Uber was founded like 20 years ago. Like I look at like dollar cabs and I'm like, we had that. Like it was right there. Like it was on demand, 24 hours, and it cost $1, right? I think about even like video content. Like I think about like in a dollar cab even 5 years ago, like they were selling all kinds of movies and DVDs on the fly right there, right? So adoption really in Black and brown or in underserved or what's called the bottom of the pyramid happens oftentimes in our communities, and we just we're not cognizant of it, I think, at this day and age. I think too much of the startup stories started around some white guy with a hoodie that made some software that everybody wants to use. And oftentimes it really just, we gotta look at it and internalize it ourselves and say, what's missing, who's not addressing and talking to us? Because I trust me when I say someone else will go out there and do that same idea. So take advantage of those resources, and also the city. Like make the city your friend. So like folks like Small Business Services, folks like NYC EDC, they always have various cohorts around the city looking for entrepreneurs. So whether you're a woman, they have something called WE, so WENYC. Go to their Facebook page, subscribe to it, go to all their free events. They've got a boot camp, something for everything, for you to test out your ideas. And more importantly, they also have like money now. So like there's a little bit of seed money around nowadays, depending on what your niche is. And I also think it's getting very vertical or very niche driven. So like fashion, food, or financial services. They are looking for very specific solutions around what are considered the strong or the strengths of the city at this point. Cybersecurity is big right now. Just last week they made a big announcement like, oh, we've got $30 million to spend. If you're in life sciences, super big boom. There's $500 million they got to spend quickly. So I say, stay close to academia, test your ideas here, and I think that kind of helps to minimize some of the fear. Because as a student, if you fail, it's okay. It's a whole other thing when you're like me and you've got kids and a family. The option to fail is not it's really not an option. And I think for me that's how I overcame my fear, was that I couldn't fail the people that were depending on me to feed them, quite honestly.
It's a big motivator.
It is a big
It's a
motivator.
huge motivator,
Yeah.
for sure. There was a time when I was taking care of my mom and looking after her when she was having trouble, and I was still running my own business and doing my own thing. It really did. It motivated me to get a new client, like every few weeks, because I knew, like, well, I gotta help my mom out with this. I gotta do that. I gotta help this. It really does. So those personal struggles or whatever however you see them, they can actually motivate you and push you forward to do the thing that you're looking for.
And the other thing, just like listening to Jimmy's story, like I think also as founders, you also find out sometimes like what you don't like about a particular business model, right? So, for instance, when I started my firm, it was straight up, interactive agency. Our product, our service was website design and back-end development. And I hated the hustle, like going out every few weeks to find more business to keep the cash flow. And so for me, when I started looking at government contracts, I was like, oh, here was that godsend that I was looking for. Like, get this government client, and you're likely to get a contract that will, last in duration from anywhere to 3 to 5 years. And so to see that direct deposit come every single month, that's how I was able to grow and hire more people, because of the fact that I had this now consistent cash flow. And again, government contracts wasn't sexy, and I think people still don't think it's sexy. But when you look at the largest companies globally, their number one client tends to be the government. The government buys everything.
Please do not sleep on it.
Don't sleep on the government. Yeah, make them your friend, because it's nice if you can, like, in one fell swoop land a contract that might be a couple of $1 million. And again, there's what's called technical assistance and support to help you get in and to overcome some of these barriers to entry.
Yeah. Some of you guys do have experience. You're professionals and have had work in different areas, and or you've worked in other places where you might have brought that experience forward. Oftentimes, if you do think about something as a service that you want to provide, there are now seminars that nyc.gov actually gives you that says, we want small businesses to become the contractors that we use. They actually promote you to do that. And those seminars are readily available for you at nyc.gov. So if you can think of those types of things, or even as you're learning new classes, if you find something that you're really excited about, and you want to dive deeper into it, get into YouTube University and Coursera, and you guys have lynda.com free accessible here. You can take any lynda.com class that you want. Just dig deep into your passion.
Yeah, and also as CUNY students, everyone has access to a free subscription to the WallStreetJournal.com and the New York Times. So if you go there, that's easily a couple $100 that you're saving. And again, this is a way to even mine the industry and find out who's writing about what, who are they talking about, how can I pitch myself. There's also for people, a lot of people might be in the arts, so if you're in the digital arts, whether that's photography, video, illustration, animation, there's also additional free resources around legal services. I'm forgetting the exact name of it, it'll come to me at the end, but I feel like their Instagram is like VLA or something like that. They host all of these various seminars or low-cost seminars around things like monetizing your content, copyright infringement, all of that good stuff to help protect you as both an artist and as a business person. So lots of great resources.
Questions from the audience? Yeah, back here.
Yes, going back to like government contracts. When I used to work for the government, there was this phrase they used to use, good enough for government work. So basically, like every time they got a contract, 9 out of 10 times it was like they go for the lowest. Whoever had the lowest prices, they would go for. Is there anything other than price that makes you more attractive to a government contract?
So in an RFP, typically there's going to be what's called an evaluation criteria section, and it will indicate what the point spread is. So whether price is the primary criteria or technical expertise. And so typically when you also respond to a bid, there's usually this what's called a technical narrative where you talk about your expertise, you show past performance, who you've worked for, and then there's the price. And that's oftentimes why they separate it and they make it a sealed bid. Because if you rank really high over here, then this should be more important than the price that you quoted. So price isn't always the primary criteria, and especially not in the federal sector. Maybe I think also if you're in goods versus services, big difference. For services, they'll pay a premium for it. For goods, toilet tissue is toilet tissue on some level, right, for the government. And as taxpayers, you kind of want your government to be good stewards and identify probably the lowest price vendor. But again, there are lots of ways now to be really competitive, whether you're a goods or a service business.
I would also recommend minority or women business enterprise, or at least finding out what the process is for that, because there are some clear numbers that the state, certainly New York State, wants to hit as they're looking to give out their various contracts, and so. And it's been pretty high across the country in general.
It's called a set-aside. So you'll see that language is called a set-aside. And again, to Dasheeda's point, in New York State, the state requirement is that they want to see at least 30% of all spending with an MWB. So the M stands for minority, the W for women. And so if you're a person of color and a woman, you can get a dual certification. And essentially, it signifies that your company has 51% ownership by one of those two, so a minority or a woman or someone that fulfills both. Typically, you do have to demonstrate like 2 years worth of experience, and that it could be any kind of paid gig. So like if you photographed your cousin's wedding and they gave you $250, just document it in some sort of contract. New York City, every single day, almost 24 hours a day, is trying to enlist people to get the city certification. And I just want to stick for just a second on this. So if you're interested in this, it is super critical to get the state certification. That without it, oftentimes you can't do business with certain city entities. So if you have to go and get one or the other, get your state one first and foremost, if possible.
What other questions you have before I jump back in? Yes.
Do you think like taxes in New York is it's too high? So my friend, right, he had to get an LLC in Ohio because the Ohio ones are like lower. Do you think because of taxes in New York are somewhat high, people are gonna outsource to like other states because they have better deals on stuff?
This could be like a whole week.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know, I definitely, my companies are not based in New York for some of those same reasons, so I understand, but I still go through a lot of the same process. I'm in the process of my MWBE certification, which as a foreign, company is a lot more hoops to jump through, so you gotta kind of take the trade-offs on what you wanna do, cause I do wanna do business in New York and I wanna make sure that, you know, I'm viable. But it does make a difference, each state, to be perfectly honest, whether or not you're from that state or not. So it's a very big trade-off, but I think ultimately a lot of people choose for the tax reasons not to necessarily be based here.
And another thing, the area and the people you're around, did it incubate your entrepreneurship?
Yes,
So the question out loud, what was the question?
the area and the people that I'm around, did it incubate my entrepreneurship? By that, do you mean that I draw from those
Yeah.
resources and primarily wrote initially? Yes. I mean, my case is even more so because I left a New York City job to go to Arizona to grieve my mother passing, and I was in the middle of what happened to be one of the largest medical marijuana markets. And so what they had problems with initially, fortunately for me, turned out to be problems for globally, the overall industry, but it was what I started my company kind of focused on initially. And the people that I hired, my resources were limited to just Arizona. And to be honest, and nothing against Arizona, but I actually was pretty excited when I finally moved back, and now we're bi-coastal, but had some sort of support on the East Coast and started to be able to draw from people on the East Coast. It just was a different caliber, a different mix of individuals to work, a different speed even. And we were 100% remote, but yeah, my first couple hires, I mean, they're no longer with the company, and I'm like, thank God, but it was because I was kind of stuck and insular to just what my community was that could provide for me. But it was a legal state, right, so that allowed me a lot more opportunities for clients and not so many questions, and I had to wait almost a whole year and a half before New York was even in that same type of conversation. So sometimes that's sort of a requirement, and you grow, you build there, and then you decide how you want to strategically move from that point.
Like, when,
Just one second.
oh,
Jimmy, just a question for you. When it comes to like the subscription model, just because the business model of subscriptions is big, like there's subscriptions for everything now, right? So you came up with people have subscriptions for clothes, and they have subscriptions for perfume, and subscriptions for toothbrushes, and you name it. So why did you choose that particular type of business right now? And what right now are some of your most important decisions that you're making in terms of a subscription-based business model?
Well, I chose the subscription model just essentially just because of the cash flow. My first business, I realized that I was having everyday cash flow. I was getting cash every day, and I thought that was very important just because it's hard to run out of money when you have consistent cash flow. And another thing I saw in the subscription model is the opportunity. There's a lot of subscription companies, but a lot of people are more willing to join subscription just because they think it's just like a one-time payment, it's a one time a month. I get my, let's say like, what's this company with perfumes? Birchbox. So Birchbox is makeup. Let's say Birchbox. You get the makeup necessary for your month, just for $14.99 a month, and people see that and they like it, and they tend to engage with it more. Yeah, I saw a lot of opportunity in this subscription company. I see the growth, and I see a lot of potential in it.
Yeah.
And what was the other part of the question?
Well, in general, when you're talking about those pieces, I always find it interesting because of some work that I'm doing with a company right now. One of the revenue streams is a subscription. It's
Yeah.
not the whole revenue stream. So why do you think it's such an important business model? I want some of the students to kind of hear about different types of businesses up here, because you guys are services, and you're providing specific services, right?
It could be software as a service,
Yeah.
those two tend to be subscription-based models. I mean, I think that there's a lot.
Have you built those for yourself and
I
your
have.
company?
I also was the founding CMO for Quella, which is a music streaming.
Absolutely.
It's like the Netflix for concert films. So I've done software as a service, I've done But again, it gets down to like, the revenue models will depend on how your customer wants to pay for it. Everything from Bloomberg, like a Bloomberg subscription for financial services is technically a subscription model, right? Like the day they decide to say, we don't want this content anymore is the day that they possibly terminate their subscription. And I think what's interesting about subscriptions are that oftentimes people don't realize what they bought. Like you bought this subscription and you're gonna get it, whether you want it or not anymore, you're still paying in perpetuity for possibly 12 months or 6 months. And that's important around thinking about the framing of your business when you're doing subscription models, renting models, software as a service, etc.
It also gives you, I mean, we work with services. I primarily came from product. I'm moving back to product in 2019. I'm very excited about that because services are really challenging sometimes. But the subscription model was something we were trying to figure out at Target and Victoria's Secret for a long time, and it truly becomes that residual income that you constantly have on the books based on whatever your churn rate is.
What's churn rate?
Churn rate is how quickly you're losing people to your subscription program. And so it is not a phenomenon that I actually see going away. It's I think we're still at the height of the bubble for subscription boxes, subscription things, but probably the benchmarks that we used when we were at Target and Victoria's Secret building these were the software, because that was the only place that we had real data where people are buying something, even if it's advanced subscription, they know they're buying it for these many months. But I do think it gives you an opportunity also to play with a new consumer. So, for example, if you have a list already for whatever reason, 50 to 100,000 contacts, you can absolutely get started pretty easily with just a box. You know what I mean? It's like a mysterious box. People will pay up to $25 a month and then forget about it, right? That's the other thing. They literally just forget about it on the debit card. And in some ways, and I hate to say it, I'm saying it on camera, but there's a hope for that too. It's like you forgot about it, and then you get to play with what's in the box. And so we did that as a test at Target, and literally no one knew what was in the box. They just knew they was getting a box from Target. It was probably gonna be personal care and beauty items, and just for $20 a month, they were willing to do that. Like, it feels like it's an easy purchase. I don't have to think about it. And God help you if you figure out what needs to be in the box. Like for my sister, it has to be certain type of foods for the big kid and some of her hair products. And if you get that box right every month, she'll pay you up to $150 a month probably just to get that to her door and not have to go out to the store to get it. So it's an interesting thing for consumer behavior. I've been studying for a while, and I'm eager to crack the code on it myself.
And two-sided markets, things like on-demand stuff, like whether it's Uber or Airbnb, you know, you might become the broker for that. Or not that, I think people are now kind of crapping on things like Groupon, but Groupon was a great novel idea where like they didn't have to come up with services, and they didn't have to own and operate brick and mortar businesses. Rather, they were serving as this like marketing agent essentially to connect people to new things. So I think that they're easily, like, we probably, like, I can't right now think of 20 business models, but easily if you're looking at things like Steve Blanks and any evidence-based entrepreneurship, they literally break it down. Like here are like 8 or 10 different types of paradigms. And I think if you become a student of that, you'll easily see where like a potential idea of yours can fit into one of those models. You know, I'm one of those people now, I love all things licensing. Because of the fact that I tend to deal in a lot of things that are not tangible. So I deal in all of these things intangible. So whether it is something digital, even though digital now I think is seen as a true tangible asset, sometimes expertise, content, licensing right now for me is more interesting than some of the other ways to monetize.
Questions? Yeah.
I have one question. What are some of the challenges that retailers encounter when they try to do the subscription model?
Well, I think it's the churn rate being much higher than we expected. How quickly you could actually adapt your back end to a customer service, like a CRM that actually really manages well a subscription. So, for example, a good subscription plan to me does still require that you notify someone beforehand that something is going to come out. And maybe it's not so much about the cost of what's coming out, but what they're going to get. We couldn't figure out exactly what if it was going to meet the needs of the customer. Not everybody wants the same perfume every single month. And not everybody, I was in beauty, by the way, I was running the beauty area, beauty and sport. But yeah, so we were running into challenges with people wanting a different iteration, as they rightfully so. That's part of the beauty of the Victoria's Secret scents, right? That you get to kind of mix and match them. And then what happens when we have our semi-annual? What happens when we have the various 3-4 or 5-4 sales? How does that impact somebody who is a subscription customer? We literally ran into various dynamics that started to cannibalize or eat into our other bread and butter businesses. And so it was, when you already have bread and butter businesses, definitely in corporate America, they don't let you slow those down. You want to see that minimum of a flat to 1% comp every year, even if you know you're growing something else, because there's always that fear that this new thing doesn't grow fast enough. And so I felt like every time we kind of got a little bit of legs under each other, it was like, oh, but it's eating into this, and so we slow down. There were a lot of different iterations, whether it's the beauty or how do we mix on the pink side, because we thought this would work well with pink, a little bit of garment with a little bit of beauty, but it came down to, we at Victoria's Secret at the time, I see, so I'm still there, but Victoria's Secret at the time really felt like they allowed the customer this mix and match in a way that other brands don't, and so how do we not give that up for a box? That from a cost perspective is much better if it's the same box every month for us, for the most part.
I also just want to note one other thing. I think the other thing that we're seeing a lot of is like gig economy based stuff. So whether that's TaskRabbit, Uber, etc. I think that that's going to continue to happen where we see a broker of sorts kind of manage this mobile workforce that goes out on demand and fulfills work. So, you know, when I got into the industry in 2001, it used to be Elance, which is now Upwork, etc. I think that that's going to continue to happen, where you, the individual, you are a self-employed entity. And so whether you want to be a founder or not, you will likely be one in the years to come, because the way people obtain and keep work in a corporate setting is not going to stay the same.
That's a great point. And to piggyback off that, just to, whenever you see these different services that are brokering these types of things, it's actually an opportunity for a side gig that can evolve into a full-time job. One of my neighbors started doing TaskRabbit installations of TVs, putting them up on the walls. Now he literally has like 19 clients a day, and he just makes, you know, X $1,000 a week on these transactions that he makes on TaskRabbit. So being your own self-employed person with the skills that you already have, using something like TaskRabbit as a way to start thinking about yourself as your own business. And sometimes we forget that these tools aren't just for us to get things done, but they actually enable the entrepreneurs and the people with entrepreneurial thinking to start their own side business. Yes?
I have a question for Jimmy. Is your subscription-based product, is it a MLM?
No. Multi-level marketing?
Yeah.
No.
Would you ever consider doing that? Like, you know, one person does a subscription and then says, oh, to his friends, oh, hey, y'all get this, and, you know, you get paid for that.
I mean, I'm not too familiar with MLM. I'd love to hear more.
It's like a pyramid.
Yeah, there were a bunch of different iterations of that. What was your other question, by the way?
No, I was about to say that, like, because the environment I grew up in, like, I have neighbors, they make $200,000 plus a year. I'm looking at that, and they give me advice, and then I go out in the world and actually do it. And I make money because of their advice. And then I look at my cousins that live not in a good area, and, like, he's, like, going towards that, and I'm trying to bring him towards something else in the center.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
You understand what I mean?
I do. I mean, there's all kinds of situations in
Like,
New York, especially.
the thing is, like, when you live in an environment where everybody is, like, in the up and up, everybody is trying to, like, go forwards, like, and you realize the area you're living in is helping you, but, and then when you see your family members that live, like, somewhere else, and they evolve into something else, it's kind of depressing.
Absolutely. And have you guys seen that in your own environments, you know, working with people or maybe even having team members where you've had to address those kinds of issues as founders?
Well, I think, I mean, I'm from East New York. Brooklyn, and it was the murder capital of the country at one point when I was growing up there. So I feel that to survive, oftentimes you have to find your allies who are often in the same trajectory. It's hard. It is really difficult when you live in an environment that isn't necessarily promoting positivity or entrepreneurship or anything really. And I got shipped out. I felt like I did in many ways transition out by going to prep school. But I still had to find in my home environment other people who, even without that same experience, really did feel like there was still light to be had, even in the hood. And I did, and my grandmother and my grandfather, but also in just the neighbors in the same community. When you tell people what you want to do, believe it or not, oftentimes that will turn a light on in somebody else. That is often the most surprising thing that I found growing up where I did, that sharing my desire to want to be, at the time I wanted to be a doctor because I was into science and math, but that desire, would open up a different conversation the next time I had communication with that person. Even the person who's technically selling drugs on the corner, but you like, hey, when you become a doctor, and just to hear that when you pass, just to hear that when you pass is almost reaffirming that I left a little bit of my light with that person, and that that was his way to kind of keep me on the straight. So it is hard. I did draw from a lot of friends who lived in nicer neighborhoods and as much as I could, but I think we all come from different places, and there's light that lives in some of these negative environments too.
Like, do you think that gentrification is good for these environments?
That's deep, but do I like the Brooklyn versus the old Brooklyn is what you're asking me? I don't know. I mean, I feel
Like,
it's a
I have the
catch-22.
same way. Like, I live in Astoria, and I'm like, I see like the rents going up and stuff like that. But it's a double-edged sword because I'm meeting different people, and I'm just like feeding off of them and basically like off their ideas. But my dad and mom, they're paying like X, Y, Z amount just to live there.
What about gentrification? Is it good or bad? It's a little bit off topic. We'll go down the rabbit hole for a second.
Yeah, my bad.
No, it's all good. What do you think?
What
Gentrification.
do I think about gentrification? I mean, I'm from Dykeman, I don't know if you guys know, but there's a lot of gentrification going on right now, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, like you said. It's like, all right, so the shootouts, the drive-bys are stopping now, but my people are leaving, and it's kind of like, all right, so I'm like in the middle. I'm still here because I'm still living there because my mom could afford it. But if my mom couldn't afford it, I'd be living somewhere else, and I wouldn't be around the area.
So I'm a planner, I guess you could say by trade, an urban and environmental planner by trade, so I'm very sensitive to all things gentrification. I think it's critical as young people to also think about collective economics, right? I think these are like concepts that were definitely important in the 60s and 70s, but even more so now, to pool your money and think about how you can get in on the game. Like, I think it's important. I think we've spent so much time in New York City always talking a lot about residential real estate, which is important, but I think it's equally important to talk about commercial real estate, talk about being involved, and I think you can be involved at the most basic level, which is sitting on your community board, learning about land use policy, learning about other things like arrest and criminal justice policy. All of that plays into it. I think that we oftentimes think about gentrification really solely as this like new perspective on what everything in the neighborhood looks like. Like, it looks cooler, there's these coffee shops and whatnot. You know, someone sent me a screenshot the other day of an Eastern European coffee shop in Bed-Stuy. And I was like, what? I was like, why do we even need Eastern European coffee shops, right? And I said to someone, and my response was, you know what, well, I need to go and open up a soul food restaurant in like Bensonhurst and like way out deep in Brooklyn where there are Eastern Europeans, right? And that's the thing, we don't do that, right? I think that our forefathers and foremothers were those people that like sat down and said, I'm gonna go and like break open this community. And likewise, we need to do that in business. Because trust me, they want your cornbread, they want your deep fried turkey this Christmas and this Thanksgiving. And so don't sleep. I think when you think about who's ordering and wants your products earlier, you know, East Asian, Southeast Asian, you know, whatever you are, they want your stuff and you need to bring it there. Because I know when I was living in Bed-Stuy, the last thing I had on my mind was some coffee. And I was like, coffee beans don't naturally grow in Europe. Like they grow in warm, humid climates, like Africa, you know, South America. So like, how do all of a sudden coffee became, like the curators of coffee became Eastern Europeans? I don't know. But I thought that was just so bizarre almost. But my advice is, you need to do the same. Go and, quote, infiltrate and go into other communities. Because guess what? If our communities are skyrocketing, theirs yet haven't, there are lots of, quote, unsexy neighborhoods that are deeper into Queens and Brooklyn. Go there. Go open it up. You know, I think about when I look at Sunset Park and other neighborhoods that tend to be now more predominantly Chinese. Like one of their big products in the market in terms of commercial space are these test prep centers, right? Like they took really basic storefronts. And the other thing is, don't always think about the storefront. You know, one of the things that I did when I was head of a coalition for one of the council people in Bedford-Stuyvesant is we had all kinds of underutilized commercial spaces. So things like commercial kitchens, right? Like you could be creating a network and have your own food service, like out there, a box service. You know, you might want to specialize in creating meal preparation for people with diabetes, right? Like, and you'd be surprised like how happy a church would be if you come in and say, oh, can we rent your commercial kitchen space for X amount of dollars? As opposed to going out and building out a whole commercial kitchen that would cost you easily 6 figures. There's so many latent, underutilized assets in our communities. And I appeal to people to go and look at that nonprofit that has like an underutilized daycare space. You might be able to operate a STEM program after hours that operates from 6 to 9. Right? Because the daycare is going to close at 6 when mom and dad got to come get those kids. But that same space might be used for an art space. Like nowadays, one of the things I see all the time are these sip and paints. I'm like, oh wow, like sip and paint. And like, and you don't, all you need is a raw room. A raw room, right? You're creating experiences or tours, like food tours in your neighborhoods. Or again, think about going outside of your own neighborhoods, go gentrify someone else's. And not that that's, I'm not being a proponent of gentrification, but if you can't afford your own community, where else might you be able to afford?
I would also piggyback exactly what Tamecca said, is that the activity as an advocate or within, you know, action within the government, believe it or not, leads right into business, because the laws that the businesses have to follow, the loopholes, the opportunities like empty buildings, those things all come to light when you're having those conversations. So I didn't actually know this as much. I knew that Target spent money lobbying, and I know Victoria's Secret does, all these big companies do. But as an entrepreneur, I didn't realize it. I happen to have been in an industry that requires it, because I have to legalize before I can really work in a state. But that is actually across all of the different
Regulatory,
disciplines.
every
Yeah.
discipline.
It doesn't matter what you're interested in. If you see something's happening in your community, get involved. Gentrification, sometimes I used to feel coming from the hood was something that was happening to us. But in actuality, there are opportunities for the community to come out and say how they want it to happen or what role they want to play in
So
it.
like new market tax credit is an important facet, like learn about it. Like if you're a business that needs physical space, look at new market tax credit. Those are in oh, and speaking of which, our favorite real estate developer, President Trump, per se, just last week, you know, rolled out 900 identified communities, and guess where they are? Like 90 of them alone are sitting right here in New York City. And it's a way for like the ultra rich to reinvest in these communities into small businesses, quote unquote, and get these tax credits. So things like new market tax credits, learn about things like a CBA, community benefits agreement. Like that community benefits agreement might be talking right to you, right? Like don't let the next person come in out of town. So for instance, when I came here, like I had to work on a deck or something for cybersecurity. 2 of the incubators that are coming out for cybersecurity are being outsourced to entities out of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And I'm like, really? Like they couldn't find anybody right here to operate 2 incubators? But this is again where you push back as citizens here in New York City and say like, no, like they need to be able to do this, or to hire this, or I want a partnership with my college, like BMCC. There's always pushback. There's always room for negotiations when it comes to gentrification. Don't lie down.
Yes, there was a question in the front up here. Was there? Okay, in the back.
Okay, and a question for you. I'm somebody who has in my family, they do braiding. And I know this topic is kind of controversial, but there's a lot of white women who definitely come to get their hair braided. And what I try to do with my family is convince them to charge them more because of the hair texture and things like that. And it becomes very controversial within the community because a lot of people disagree with you bringing your business to people who don't have or not of African background. Because I don't agree with it, but also we benefit a lot from it because me charging $200 to a white woman versus $90 to a black woman.
So I look at it like this, someone is gonna productize that somehow, some way, and I literally had a joke, and it's probably on my phone right now, that's not PC, and I said, as soon as this group of people find out how to do African hair braiding, all the y'all are shut down, right? Every last one of them. And I would say like African braiding is an interesting scenario to look at that industry right now, where yes, a particular group of people have monopolized it, but it's not something that you cannot learn and master. Right, I know a young lady, she's Jamaican, and she is killing it in China. And it's because she's selling hair, she buys and sells hair, and she does this braiding. And I would say, yeah, I mean, there is, for instance, you can make a case for why you have to charge certain people more. I know as someone that has, quote, straight hair, I know by default I'm getting charged more. And it isn't because it's for that reason. Like, I'm always told, oh, your hair isn't this, your hair isn't that. Like, it's so much harder and more difficult to braid. And if that's the case, so be it. Right, but my point is that I say don't feel the guilt of it. You are in the business of making money and making jobs, right? I want every single person in here to realize that the opportunity is about making another job, right? Creating legacy and wealth and change, right? When I think about like all of these on-demand like Glam Squad and stuff like that, I'm like, when is the braiders gonna come? Because I hate going into a braiding salon. I hate it. Like it's the worst experience. Whether it's like the fact that it's not clean, it's just all chaotic. And part of that is somewhat amusing the first time or the second time around, but as someone that's a businesswoman with lots of demands, like I don't want that experience. Like I am that person now that's like, hey, like who can you recommend that can come in home, right? And I think again, that's that opportunity for you to seize on. I mean, I think about even my son goes to a predominantly white independent school, and every year, I can guarantee you when that braiding subject is gonna come up, when we do family dinner and Halloween. And I swear all of them make the journey out to Fulton Street in Brooklyn. And then the new one is that there's this place that I used to frequent when I was in Williamsburg, and they had a braiding menu. And I was like, oh, look who's braiding hair. And it's this, but they had the blowout crew, and then they had the braid crew. And the braid crew looked like us. So they are aware of it. They know that there's a niche market there for things like that. Just like I would say, one of the things that I hadn't seen until you're out in the suburbs are places that instead of like a blowout bar, they got a lice bar. You could go to Westchester right now and easily there are like 10 places where you can go and take your kid after winter break, spring break, and they just doing delicing all day. That's all they do. Just taking out lice. So, and I think it's important that it's a real service, and you don't want that necessarily. You want to quarantine that, right? And so like they have these bars, just like how we have what's the blowout bar, the one that's national, the yellow and black one. Dry bar, right? So to me, like when's the braid bar gonna come by? And so I think that this is again a scenario in looking at businesses and how to create those menus, right? Like box braids, underhand braids, twists. Like if you come up with 5 or 6 things and you know that price point and there's like a little bit of wiggle room, people respect it because they know going in what they're getting out of this, right? Like there's a quality of standard associated with that.
So I had a question that's like somewhat on a note, especially in relation to you because I mentioned in your story, one of your first ventures that you bought a business. I think for young people getting into finances and purchasing, I wanted to get your opinion on if you thought anything from buying a business to buying stocks, or really how you recommend, if you recommend that route of, acquiring companies and how flexible that was for you at that age, because, it sounded like you were pretty young, and, I'm curious where you even found the opportunity to buy a whole business for a reasonable price, I feel like stocks are a little bit more flexible with your ability to invest in, but I definitely just wanted to get a little opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get into business, any type of business, what business are you interested in?
Well, I'm more interested in business of acquiring other businesses. So I wanted to hear about, that was your first move. You acquired this business and was able to make it better, and then you sold it off, and now you're starting your other business. I just, wanted a little bit more detail on, you feel the benefit of that, maybe even versus starting your own. If the move maybe really picking up these businesses, pimping them out, and then selling them off to the next buyer. Instead of just spending all that investment time in your own. Is the business doing that to a real business versus buying 100, 500 stocks of another smaller company, waiting for that to shoot up a little bit, and then selling those off repeat,
Yeah. I'm a big fan of having multiple incomes. So if you want to buy a business and you also want to buy stocks, you can do both. I mean, distribute your income, whatever money you have. And there's a lot of people that make tons of money just buying and selling business. It's like real estate. People see a foreclosure home, fix it up, and sell it for a big markup. So it depends what type of entrepreneur you are. Do you want to start a business? Do you want to build a brand? Or do you want to buy a brand and develop it and build it and grow it? So there's a ton of money in reselling businesses, and if you want to get into it, I would suggest just like Googling.
Yeah, I think it's very research driven, right?
Yeah.
Whether you want to build a franchise route, you look at Amazon.
Oh, is that what it was going with franchise?
I bought a route, but it was
okay.
it's part of a big company.
Got it.
Just like a franchise.
Do you mind me asking how much that costs? I think a lot of people, when you start talking investment and finances, people close their ears off because they assume it's out of their realm of affording. Not knowing that there's anything from businesses or stocks that you can get from a penny to, I'm sure, a couple of thousand or whatever.
I mean, I'll if you want to talk afterwards, I can
Depending on the brand, a franchise can be as low as maybe $25K, $50K to upwards to $150, $200K, and then showing capitalization, meaning you have some sort of capital in the bank. It depends. I mean, I've always wanted an IHOP franchise. I'm still thinking about it. Actually, you're laughing because I'm actually wanting to do this, but I know I actually think franchising is still one of those things that used to be really big at one time, and how a lot of people generated wealth maybe 60s, 70s, and now it died down. And I think if I could, convince millennials and younger folks, even my son, to be like, this is something you should look at. I think if somebody already has a proven model and the marketing and the branding is already respected, and you can just bring in just add your water kind of thing, then why wouldn't you not look at it if you can afford to?
Yeah, and aside from brick and mortar franchises, there are also things like, what's that Kathy something, the clothing line one? They're especially in accessories and clothing and various verticals, there's lots of opportunities around essentially becoming an independent contractor for those businesses. And you'll see it in every industry, so whether it's medical, fashion, accessories, but I think a lot of research is required, right, before you jump into it. And I also say that there seems to be new derivatives coming around, like even digital properties and entities around storefronts and things like that. Drop shipping, I know we haven't even talked about drop shipping, right, but drop shipping is a great option sometimes for people. So drop shipping, for those that are not aware of it, is essentially, there are wholesalers that develop clothes, and you might see a dress, you're like, I saw that dress in such and such, and I saw this. Why? Because they're all just doing drop shipping. So you might create a beautiful storefront and a brand for your entity, and the merchandise behind it is some drop shipping. So, and now the tools around drop shipping are amazing.
Yes, they're so much better.
They're so much better than they were even 3 years ago. So drop shipping, franchising, licensing stuff, being an independent contractor and essentially a salesperson and building a sales team. We forget that an insurance brokerage is essentially almost a franchise, right? You become a broker and then you enlist salespeople. That has tremendous cash flow and residual income for years. And I think a lot of it now is becoming less storefront mom and pop and a lot more people finding you and identifying you through digital marketing. But if you're gonna turn around a business, you really gotta know that particular business really well. And I don't think many people can turn around any business. So if you watch The Prophet on MSNBC, he's a rarefied human being that can go in and look at any business and turn it around. The average person that does turnaround businesses knows a very specific vertical, like hair salons, restaurants, etc. And those to me are capital intensive. That's why I'm in services. Like I am capital intensive scared, straight up. And then with regards to stock, I think also if you're a subject matter expert or someone that can help another person grow their business, like come in off the bat asking for equity. Whether that's, restricted stock, common stock, whatever that is. Ask for a piece of their business. Say like, hey, why not give me 1%, 3%, 5% of your business, especially if they have an established business that they need some help to kind of innovate with, and you've got that innovation that they can, add to their business.
I'll just add to all of this in the sense that we're in New York City, one of the largest cities in the world, and so it's easy for us to find a market here. We are not in smaller towns where it might be difficult for you to do something like the drop shipping that they were talking about. If you start looking into it and talking to people, what are people looking for? Are they looking for necklaces? Are they looking for eyewear? What are they looking for, and how can you build a business around that? So sometimes it's not even about you like creating something yourself as much as creating the audience and finding the audience, the market that you want to sell to.
I also want to say like contract manufacturing. Like you might be someone that might be interested in what's called contract manufacturing. So let's say you have like a small plant or some sort of mechanism by which to make spaghetti sauce. So what you would do is market your services to other people that want to make sauce, right? Or people that want to make cereal. You'd be surprised. Like there's only a handful of people that are making dry cereal. And that's because of the fact that all of this is called contract or white label manufacturing. So you might be that person that says, I want to invest in the marketing, the infrastructure for this contract manufacturing. So you might have the labor and the equipment, and let those businesses come to you. So like makeup is a great example of that. Like there's only a handful of people making those actual makeup products that end up on the shelf. The only thing that changes and differ oftentimes is a handful of ingredients and some good packaging.
And notice in New York City, there's a resource called Made in NYC. Made in NYC really wants you to become a manufacturer. They want you to make products in the city. They provide you all kinds of support. They'll do part of the research for you. They'll help you figure out where you're going to get the components that you need to make your product. If you can figure out how to make it with 3D printing, they're even more excited because they love tech and they want high-tech manufacturing. So if you have an idea in your mind that would fit that kind of thing, Made in NYC is great for it too.
The problem is doing business here and just outsourcing it as manufacturing-wise. It's too expensive to do like manufacturing in New York City.
Yeah, you have to be creative.
It just depends on the industry though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like for instance, I know some businesses that are in the printing space, and they're literally almost, I feel like they're printing money because they just have so much business. And with the new equipment that's coming online, like they have new services and hybrids of their business. Like I've seen one business do a lot of stuff with photographers, right? Like if you're in the photography business, like oftentimes you really do want to have something like that right here. That may not seem like manufacturing, but when you see the behind the scenes and the processes that are involved, from whether that's an acquisition of the papers, chemicals, etc., all of that really almost is the mechanics of a manufacturing business. It just depends on how you see it and how you market yourself.
Couple more questions, yes.
Jimmy, just that you guys brought up photography. I used to work 6 years ago. There was a boom that people will give you a coupon and say, hey, you have won a session, photography session, and then you will go to the studio, take the pictures, all that stuff, and then at the end I spend like $100. But that is gone now with cell phones and all the apps. How can a photographer, I'm a photographer side business, start its own entrepreneur venture?
I think I also take photography and I do film, black and white. I think just putting out content and putting yourself out, you learn a lot of skills, a lot of different ways. And I think photography is one of those arts where it's like, if you're a street photographer, you only see one action once, and if you happen to take a snap out of it, it could mean 1,000 words for someone else. So I think photographers are one of those. It's always been where you just gotta put out content, you just gotta do it. Go out there and take pictures and put it on your Instagram to see what people like and what people don't like.
I think photography is very niche, so I think that there's lots of ways to make money if you're very specific around like event-based photography or experience-based photography. I have a friend that has a startup in travel, and part of the packages when you buy this experience, this trip, is that they also, you can add on for like $300 to this photographer. So like you and your companions go on this trip and you have all these great shots. Why? Because you've hired a photographer for the day. So it's the same thing, like if you hire a driver for the day and a tour guide, well now everybody wants cool pictures because why? Their IG's gotta be great, right? And you think it's amateur, but it's not. It's because they've hired a photographer, and I think it's no different than baby photography, portraits for schools, wedding photography. Like, so for instance, my son just got back his proofs for his school photos, and I was like, oh my God, like how much has school-based photography changed? Like, they've got signage now, and action shots, and animated GIFs, and all of it comes on this one little sheet where I see his code, and then I can go and log in and order 1 or 20. But like you said, it starts off with like, I log in and I'm like, okay, I'm basically gonna spend like $200 if I want this. And at a base price, just to get the digital proofs, was like $80. And I'm like, when did school photography become that expensive? And this is a Brooklyn-based business. And it looks like it's a franchise. When you look at the URL, they're just one of many people that are doing this. Also, like, you might, again, if you own very specific equipment, like I feel like at every school fundraiser now, even like the basic holiday party, everyone wants one of those like little like photo booth things that does the animated GIF. Like, that's easily, a PTA will pay $500 or more for that one machine to come. And you're not doing anything but just showing up with a machine. The rest of it is like self-maintained. And then, of course, you're giving them cloud-based access to it. But I think in photography, it's about knowing your niche. It might be you're good at filming animals. I know a photographer that films, that shoots pets, and they make plenty of money. But it's because, again, they know how to photograph pets really well. So I think it's very niche-driven. Like maybe your photography is women, or maybe it's survivors, maybe it's journalistic. You have to find a niche that you know that you can monetize.
So,
And
go ahead.
Going off from that, there's this website called Shutterstock. I don't know if you guys use it. You can put up your picture there, and people buy. I buy pictures from there all the time. Craigslist is a good eval for your services. And there's also a website called Balama, where you could rent. You can put your equipment up for someone to rent it, and you get money off of that. So there's a lot of ways to make money in photography.
Dasheeda, Tamecca, and Jimmy, I'm so excited to have had you guys here today for this first inaugural Ask the Entrepreneurship launch event. Big round of applause for these guys. The things you're doing are amazing, and we're just so excited to have had you here, and so honored for you to have spent your time with us today. Thank you so much, and we'll be around. These guys are hanging around here, so please come up and ask them your questions. I saw there's still hands up for you. Please, if you want to email them to me, many of you guys know my email. If not, I'll put it up there. You can also send it to us in our social media, and we'll make sure it gets to these guys, and they answer your questions if you need to run out. I know classes are about to shift right now, so if you have a couple of minutes to hang around, please do so. And thanks again. Round of applause.
Like I told her, I'm leaving Florida. I'll be yeah, I oh my God. And I let everybody else when I got just everything's small, like as you can see, that was small.
know back in when I was young, my mom used to go to snacks, but she used to have jewelry. And people come in, drink tea or coffee, and then they'll buy jewelry as well. So there's a lot of jewelry